All right, great. Well, I'm happy to be here and share some of the experience that I went through in trying to implement it was House Bill 1288, the Colorado Taxpayer Transparency Act. The bill came to me, I was a new legislator, just got into the legislature upon an appointment from my previous representative who went on to become a state senator. So I actually was sworn in a couple of weeks late in the legislature. At that time, Amy Oliver Cook, who works with the Independence Institute on the Colorado Transparency Project, came to me because there was another representative in Colorado who had run the bill the year before who decided to drop it because he wanted to work with the governor of the state of Colorado to only bring aggregated spending to the state. That representative has since resigned his position as a state representative and has gone to work for the governor of the Colorado as a director of one of his departments. So, needless to say, I'm a big fan of transparency. Before I became a legislator, I worked for a member of Congress for 5 years, and so I know Colorado issues. Before that, I was an activist for about 15 years, and so I love working to do things to benefit the taxpayers. And so I was extremely excited to have the opportunity to work on this transparency bill. Let me ask you first, has anybody run transparency bills here in this room, or are you planning to run transparency bills? There are a few of you. Well, if you want to pass a transparency bill, I'd say the biggest obstacle that you're going to face is whether your governor and his administration have the will to work with you on that or not. In my case, I was able to get my bill passed, even though the governor worked with this former legislator and a few other legislators to try to kill my bill at various points throughout the process. Since getting the bills passed in May, I've run into problems with getting the bill implemented properly. So just to give you a little bit of a history of the bill, because I think it's going to help you overcome obstacles that you may face throughout the process, I'd like to just give you a little bit of a history. I began working on the bill in January and took various things out of the bill that the previous legislator had been working on. I took contracts out of the bill because it was going to raise the fiscal note by a huge degree. And as some of you may know, we're having a big budget crisis like many states here in the United States. And so I was mostly interested in trying to get individual expenditures and revenues online because I thought that was going to really help the taxpayers. And more than that, I also thought it would help us as legislators. Because I don't know about you, but we legislators in the state of Colorado don't necessarily have direct access to all of that information. And certainly, transparency is such a great issue, and it's just a wonderful issue to talk to the press about, too, because they're very interested in this, because they also have to file Open Records Act requests in order to get information, and so sometimes they'll spend hundreds or thousands of dollars to try to get access to information on state spending. I immediately went to the governor just to ask to see if he might be interested in working with me to implement this through statute rather than executive order, but I really never heard back from him on that. I went to then the Department of the State Controller to talk with him since he would be very involved in this, and at that time, and Amy Oliver Cook was also in that meeting with me, and at that time the State Controller actually threatened to kill the bill with a high fiscal note. And so we were quite amazed that he would actually do that. But we also had a representative in Colorado at the time who had just run and passed a bill to make it illegal for departmental heads to put high fiscal notes on bills simply to kill them. So ultimately it was a $75,000 fiscal note on the bill, and at that point, needless to say, in spite of that, I knew he would still be a great opposition for me. Fortunately, I got most of my Republican colleagues to sign onto the bill, and I got 10 of my Democrat colleagues to sign onto the bill paper the day that I got that paper. And I was quite honest with them and upfront that I knew the governor might, or probably would, work against me on this bill. But they didn't seem to be too concerned about that, and they were mostly, at least these 10 legislators, my Democrat colleagues, were interested in transparency. It's a hard issue to fight and to say that you don't want that. Everybody loves transparency. Just prior to taking House Bill 1288 to the House Finance Committee, the governor tried to essentially derail my committee hearing the next day by going ahead and having a big press conference and issuing the executive order, which only brings aggregated spending to this online project. In spite of that, I still took it to House Finance and worked behind the scenes that day to go to all of the House Finance members. That a couple of these legislators working with the governor were trying to give misinformation of them. And when I took it before House Finance, I argued with them that taxpayers want the details. They want the individual expenditures and revenues. They don't really care that much about aggregated sum spending. And so ultimately I did get it passed out of House Finance on a 7-3 vote. And then I took it to House Appropriations, and again these couple of legislators still went to these members of that committee to try to give them misinformation, and so throughout that whole process it was a matter of me watching and recognizing what they were doing and going to each of these members that I saw them going to as well and trying to give them the correct information so that they could make a rational and a reasonable decision about whether they were going to support the bill in their committees or not. Immediately after those two committee meetings, and it did pass out of appropriations, by the way, even with a $75,000 fiscal note attached. I actually worked with the Speaker of the House at that time a bit, too, because he was actually a fan of transparency, and so he actually wanted to see the bill pass as well. But immediately after those two committee meetings, I went to the press and one particular reporter with the Denver Post and some other news media and let them know that I thought the governor of the state of Colorado was trying to kill my bill, that he didn't want transparency. And so they were very interested in that. And in fact, one of the handouts that you have is a Denver Post article, an op-ed that talks about that. And really was it, they essentially asked the governor to try to work together with me because they agreed that doing it the way that he was doing it through executive order, just by providing aggregated sum totals, was not the way to do this, that we do need access to the individual expenditures, because otherwise the press and the journalists are still going to have to file Open Records Act requests. So the arguments that I made there with all of my colleagues in both of those committee hearings and in talking to the press about it was that we need it concretely in statute. An executive order can be rescinded, so we need to have it concretely in statute so that any future governor can't rescind that. Another argument is the one that I just explained, that it costs sometimes hundreds or thousands of dollars to file Open Records Act requests, and that's not a very fair thing to ask of taxpayers this is their money, this is our money, and we deserve to know how the state is spending our money. And finally, of course, just getting back to the individual expenditure and revenue data, that we need that, not aggregated sum total spending, which really tells people not a whole lot.